We just had another patent issue today. We now have 12 issued patents.
Oh, really?
Yes.
What is the process of getting a patent like?
So in this space, in the speech space, going back 20 years after my partner created natural language processing and Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is a medical dictation product that I was just speaking about. Many of the large institutions, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Cambridge, Arizona State, that are in this space, began doing research and patenting extensively. But they used word-based analysis. NLP, natural language processing, is based on sub-word features of speech. Word-based analysis is relatively crude in the analysis of human conditions, diseases, even sentiment analysis. Because a person subjectively can say, I'm doing perfectly fine. I mean, an older person like myself, if you ask me, how are you doing, Henry? I'll say, I'm doing well. It's in perspective, My father lived through World War II. My grandfather was in World War I. I've got that in my memory.
Yeah.
I'm doing fine compared to that, And, but we look at 2,548 different features of speech, over 15 million characters every minute, data elements every minute. And that's objective. It's not controlled by our conscious. It's how language is created, how words are actually structured, formed, the power of that speech, the excitement that is in one's voice. Because they don't say to you, I'm so excited about this.
Yeah.
They are. They're at a soccer match and their child is playing, they're jumping up and down, or they're just telling you about the game on the phone even. And hey, you must be at your daughter's soccer again, aren't you?
Yeah.
We know that. And that's part of the musical element of speech. It's also part of understanding how a person is really doing. That's what we patented.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
How did the company get started? How did you get involved? How did all this begin?
So it's really one of those true life kind of stories, So 45 years ago, I was at the National Institutes of Health. I was a researcher in neurological diseases. My business partner, Jeff Adams, was at the NSA building mathematical models to de-encrypt spy messages.
Oh, wow.
Speech and language didn't exist at the time. What we know today, everything we take for granted, didn't even exist. He was a pioneer in understanding language at a particle level, at a sub level. And
who even has that type of experience? There's got to only be a handful of people in the entire world, if anyone.
Today, a lot more because of what he did. And so he and I met then. We were both in the Washington, D.C. area. We became friends. He went on to a career. The shorter story is my career. I went on to a career after NIH in business. I did corporate turnarounds for a number of years where I was an interim CEO. I liked it. I was pretty good at it. I always went in to save a company, not to close a company down. And you either close it down or you save it. If you're going to close it down, you bring in accountants. And so Jeff went on to a career after the government, which I will say he would still be there, self-chained to the chair. He loved doing it. But he went on to work with Ray Kurzweil, who's an amazing American scientist and an inventor. And Ray wanted to create natural language processing at the time, but Jeff possessed the skill set. So the two of them got together and they produced the first commercially available natural language processing. Jeff went on to build Dragon Naturally Speaking, which was the medical product in ambient listening, and that is we now know as Nuance. He led the Nuance team for a while before he went on to other things. 3 years ago, Microsoft bought Nuance for $16.5 billion. And
it's a good exit.
Yeah, and they dominate that kind of space. Now, Jeff had left 25 years earlier. He went on to work for a company called Yap. Yap was Jeff was leading the team in effort to build speech to text for phones, speech to text for legal, speech to text for multiple languages, a range of different things in the space, all pioneering, all first ever. And about 10, 11 years ago, a little more than that now, about 12 years ago, Amazon had two major projects on the table. One was an Amazon phone, and the other one was what we now know as the Amazon Echo, or the Alexa product. They were looking for a team to build the Alexa. So they simply bought Yap. And they got Jeff and 17 speech and language scientists, and they got Jeff O'Neill, a patent lawyer and a PhD in machine learning. Jeff O'Neill led the patent team, published 256 patents, I think, in 3 years in the speech space. Jeff Adams led the technical team that built and launched the Amazon Echo. So that's life experience with Jeff and myself, and he knows my family, and I know his. We were just lifelong friends from that on. 8 years ago, we were in a bagel shop down the street here up the street, I guess, on University. We were at the bagel shop up here. And he was finishing up, finished his year severance at Amazon. I was finishing with a job that I had done here. And we just asked ourselves, what could we do together? And he talked about creating an engineering firm that would look at all things speech, things that never had been done before. And there are many of them. And they continue to be there, but difficult tasks, things that nobody could do. And I said, that's great. You're going to do all kinds of wonderful things, pay the bills and employ a lot of people. But what do you really want to do? And he said, well, I've always wanted to apply speech and language to the analysis of human condition and disease. I said, why don't we do that? And that was the genesis of it.
So what does that mean exactly?
So what we do is we listen to conversation. Imagine you're a clinical team person, or it could be just myself on my cell phone, trying to monitor my own health behavior in an objective way. Because, if I go to a doctor and they ask me, we got into this before, how are you doing today? I could say, hey, I'm doing fine. I might be suffering from depression and anxiety, but not what I mentioned. And because I figured I can handle it, not because I'm a big boy, but because that's what I was taught.
Yeah.
And
stuff it down.
Yeah.
Rub some dirt on it.
So what we do is every 20 milliseconds, we take a slice of speech, conversation. Our APIs and our technology are mature enough and advanced enough that we do what is called streaming ambient listening. So if we're in an environment, whether you're talking to your phone or you're in a conversation in a clinical environment, and we operate in a high trust, clinical, secure environment, ourselves and the clients we work with, we're just listening. And when our API has acquired at least 40 seconds of speech, we analyze that for 12.5 million data elements, and we compare that to an existing algorithm that we have built in a clinical environment, matched against different diseases. And today we have 4 areas that we're developing now. One is progressive neurological diseases, one is behavioral health, cognitive health, and then we have a group of childhood illnesses we're working on. So in the progressive neurological space, we have things like Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease. We're working on MS. We are working in the behavioral health area we have existing models for anxiety, depression, mood, fatigue, and also we're working on PTSD. So MS and PTSD will be out later this year. And then in the cognitive area, we can tell the difference between a normal cognitive from speech, normal cognitive function, mild cognitive impairment, which is like a precursor to Alzheimer's disease, and then Alzheimer's disease. And we do that in multiple languages: Japanese, Spanish, English, Irish English, British English, Canadian English.
Yeah.
We're in Australia. We're in the Emirates. And we're deployed in all those places in high trust environments. And so when we listen to that 40 seconds, our API can have a conversation ongoing. It doesn't have to be a continuous 40 seconds from any one person, but it's listening and gathering audio more than yes or no's.
So do you have like these clinic rooms like mic'd up? Is that like how you're getting the audio? Like how does that work?
From a tablet.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. From a telephone, from a video conference call.
Wow.
And those are slightly different models, and you
Yeah.
have to validate those models, and you have to understand speech. But in our genome are multiple products that never existed before in the world in the speech area. So we weren't a graduate school program, as good as they are, that was learning speech. We were a program that had been building speech for 40 years. And so we have scientists from all parts of the world, from Germany, from England, from India, postdocs in the US, from Korea. We have individuals that advise us in Australia, US born and raised. Jeff graduated from Brigham Young University. Our chief technical officer also graduated from Brigham Young. Both of them were born in Provo. Coincidental, totally, didn't know each other. Both work for Nuance,
That's
separate
so
periods
awesome.
of time. Yeah. And so we have a range of different experiences. And in that 40 seconds that we capture intelligently, every disease I've mentioned, all of them could be measured in that same sample.
So that's what I don't understand. Tell me how that works. Like, what is the science behind that? How can you do that in 40 seconds?
So let me give you a specific example. Huntington's disease, which we academic papered with the Harvard Beth Israel group, published at the American Neurological Society meetings. When the very first samples we got were a half a dozen or so of individuals that were known to have Huntington's disease. We took their audio sample and we extracted those features, those 2,548 features. We extracted those. We compared those features statistically to the same feature set from a control group known not to have Huntington's. 1,103 of them were different. In this person. Now, this is vibrational characteristics of the vocal cords, their respiratory sounds, the power of our respiration, how quickly those things change, how quickly they recover to a baseline. Those are elements of all of this. The central nervous system controls it all. And if you think of the 2,548, it's like having an enormous orchestra. And each one of those has its own contribution to the creation of speech. And there's a conductor. In this case, it's the central nervous system. So it's controlling those self-consciously. How we move our tongue, our lips, and everything else that goes into it. It's the most complex motor function of the body. I believe when one considers data created by the human person, it's the second densest set of data we create. It's second
What's
only
the first?
the genome.
Yeah.
So it codes for everything.
Yeah.
Now, the genome's different in its information. It's coding for everything. But it's an indication of what may happen. It's kind of like, the story of Christmas past and Christmas future, Is this actually going to happen? So an individual with the genes for Huntington's, that's a dominant gene. They're going to get Huntington's. But somewhere between 28 and 50 years old, they manifest the disease. When they manifest it, and no one knows for sure when that'll happen in the individual, and they don't know why the difference is not like that. It's nice to know that because there are treatments, but those treatments are not given because there are drawbacks to them. There are complications, but they can prolong an individual's normal life. So you want to start them when you need to. There are other nuances in like Parkinson's and other things that we're working on too. But in that particular case, we're 98% accurate in identifying pre-manifest to manifest. We're very accurate in identifying the stage before that. We even know when a person has that gene because they're
just from their voice.
From their voice. And so people often ask me, well, what do you combine different biomarkers? And the answer is yes, we have the capacity to do that. In fact, our patents protect for that also. But if you're 98% accurate in a 40-second sample, and at the same time, you can accurately tell them what their depression levels and anxiety levels are, I probably don't need to add a complication of something else, like what are their eyes doing or face doing. Those things are biomarkers that can add and support. Obviously, we're not trying to predict that someone has a gene. If one of their parents have it, they have it. So it's really a matter of doing a genetic test. And that's very solid and it's good. But the sensitivity to it is like the wow moment where you go, "That's from the voice."
Yeah.
And let me tell you what we said in this bagel shop that got us down this road, got us thinking at that aha moment. Jeff was describing to me what MIT and Carnegie Mellon and Cambridge were doing and analyzing words and the work that had been done. All of it was word-based analysis. Agatha Christie, a British author, famous British author, 40 years of novels, died with Alzheimer's disease. Now, MIT had 40 years of data, complex books. So they looked back at the books and digitized it and looked at the words she was using and the complexity of her sentence structure. And they said, aha, see right here, this book, we can see in this year a deterioration in the structure of her sentences.
You're kidding.
No, they could see it.
So this is through not even speech. This is through written.
The written. And it was groundbreaking work because it indicated for the first time that how we speak, what we speak, how is what we look at, what is what they were looking at, can tell us something. And this is at a time when deep neural nets didn't exist and correlations and mathematical treatments, and these guys are geniuses. So no problem there, check that box. But along the way, you have to ask yourself, how can I create something that's practical in the clinical environment? And most of us don't have 40 years of Agatha Christie's novels. And most of us don't have Agatha Christie's language skill sets.
Right.
So by the time Agatha had advanced Alzheimer's disease, she's probably pretty much on par with Henry O'Connell, me. And I don't have Alzheimer's. So as a control, it's very difficult to figure out a control because what do you control for? Yeah. In this case, it's language and it's education maybe, and it's reading and it's use of words. And it's, we argue all the time, was Shakespeare really just one person,
Yeah.
Because it's hard for us to believe that anybody could have that range of capabilities. Well, read Agatha Christie's books, Yeah. I think maybe there were more than one Shakespeare person, but nonetheless, I can imagine because of her that someone can advance themselves in a skill, they become an expert in it.
Yeah.
So from a practical standpoint, it never found a commercial product or helped anybody in a clinic or anyone do analysis. And then I asked Jeff a question. He knows my kids, and he knows my wife and I have 5 children. And I said to Jeff, well, you know my kids. When Caitlin was 8 years old, he wrote a happy birthday song for her and sat her down on a piano stool at our place at the time in Massachusetts, where we lived together. We weren't in the same home, but we lived in the same church group, for instance. And he just pounded through this piano, singing her happy birthday at the same time. It changed her vision of what a piano could do. I think it elevated her to the pianist she became. And so I said to Jeff, my daughter, when she comes home, and she's at that moment, 8 years ago, she was married and had a child and was living out of home. I always tell people, not my best moment. I would have them still there.
Oh, for sure.
But when she would come home from soccer, her junior year or senior year, she's walking across the room, and I could tell from that walk that this was a good day or a bad day. All of us, you're shaking your head, of course, And then she would turn towards me. I would say hello. She'd turn towards me, and I could tell from her face, a biomarker, if you will. Okay, not a good day. And I would say, how was your day? And her answer would be,
good.
Yeah, fine.
Just always good.
Fine.
Great.
And keep walking. And I'd go, no. Time out. Come back. Give me some time. And then we would talk about it. And maybe it was a chemistry exam. Maybe it was the soccer coach. Maybe it was this or that. Whatever it was, we'd talk about it. And I said to Jeff, she didn't live with me anymore. But every other day or so, I'll call her. And within moments of that conversation starting, and it has nothing to do with the words she's speaking, and it's irritatingly accurate, I know whether it's a good day or a bad day. I know if she's excited or not. How am I doing that? And he goes, I'm not sure. I said, because it isn't anything. It doesn't matter what word she is saying. And he said, I've often thought this is kind of the musical element of speech. I have come to believe that the words we use to describe emotion are a reflection of hearing those emotions. We had to find a word to describe what we were already hearing. If you're out somewhere, you can tell the difference between a scream because your soccer team is winning and a scream because someone just ran over your dog.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between the two. And somehow buried in what we call language and how these words are formed, the same word brings a whole set of different emotions. And then we asked ourselves, well, if we could figure out how that's done in a practical way, that's what a clinical team member, whether a nurse or a nurse practitioner or a doctor or any member of the team, they're looking at, listening to, and trying to assess, when Mary told me she was fine, is Mary really fine? That's what good people do all the time. I mean, lawyers do that too, for different reasons, But I said, Jeff, if we could normalize that, if we could create a practical tool that could assist in that, and if we could do that where we gave that information in real time, tablet sitting there, you're talking to Mary, and I notice Mary's anxiety levels are sky high. In a very practical way, those tablets are sitting in clinics in the Beth Israel Harvard Neurology Group. And not only are we assessing Huntington's disease or Parkinson's disease, we're also assessing things they don't normally look for. And it's not because they're not good doctors. They're neurologists. Mm-hmm. We're telling them in real time that anxiety and depression are a problem or that it's elevated. Mm. So they're then capable of making a referral to a psychologist or a psychiatrist to help that individual deal with that. That may improve their sleep. We could tell them that they're fatigued, that they're tired, that their energy levels are low. So if a person comes in and they seem very anxious, their anxiety may be centered around the fact that they're depressed. Yeah. It may not, if you've solved a depression problem, the anxiety is just going to resolve itself. Mm-hmm. So the doctor gets more information. The clinical team member does. So that's what we do.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. And it really came about because of this vast experience that Jeff has and a few aha moments that said, we believe this would work, but how can you make it practical? How can you bring it to the desk or the table or the hands of an individual?
Are there human beings who are just naturally better at that than others? I mean, there's this thing called empaths. I don't know if they're real or not, but somebody who can feel other people's emotions like that. That's a real thing.
I've never met one. I don't live a very diverse life. No, I do. But I believe that there are a lot of people that are very, very good at reading. I mean, think of poker players or something. I don't watch poker, but I know it exists in the world. And there are people who are really good by the chance of it, what cards you're getting. There shouldn't be no reason that on a consistent basis over 1,000 games that any individual is better than anyone else.
Yeah.
People aren't cheating with cards. They're just for some reason better at knowing when to fold them.
Yeah.
The old country western song.
Yeah. Yeah.
They know that. And I don't know how they know it. They're reading cues in the players, and they talk about that, and they're trying not to flinch, not to be read, not to give a tell. I guess that's what they call it. But I think in real life, we're doing that a lot. Mothers, long before their child gets diagnosed with, which is the other area we're working on, childhood illnesses, long before a child gets diagnosed with autism, a mother knows, a father knows. Mm-hmm. They're trying to get a diagnosis to get them into a track to help them. And that's an area where we can help primary care recognize conditions, give them indications through just a voice analysis that a consideration for that should be. During the pandemic, things eased up with respect and broadened out with respect to insurance reimbursements in a remote, non-contact way. So today there are 15 to 17 what are called CPT code insurance codes that reimburse for what Canary does. And so we function as a medical device company registered with the FDA. We also function within an environment that's on par with any of the hospital that we work with in any part of the world. And we pass audits, of course, both with those companies, but also we pass audits annually. And then we're high trust ready right now. We're in a final stage of a high trust audit. So we try to be a good partner in the space.
Yeah. At what point does this go beyond healthcare? Like I'm even thinking like, because you mentioned like your partner worked at the NSA for a while. I just wonder like, if I'm Putin and I have this technology and I can take 40 seconds of President Biden's speech and diagnose the exact illness he has, and it's 90, you know what I mean? Like at what point does this become everywhere?
So
It's almost a superpower.
Yeah, you wonder sometimes, don't you? Now, there are two answers, both of which are accurate. One is that we made a decision at the very beginning we would be a healthcare company and that we would build everything we build in the rigors of the healthcare environment, peer review, paper it, everything. The current gold standards, the evaluation of neurologists and psychiatrists and others, we would match up with them because you're trying to create a tool in their toolbox that could facilitate and assist them, support them in the work they do. Now, you take that tool across other markets, and we have done that. We're in the call center space right now where we offer the previous tools were, again, based on word analysis and choice of words and usage.
Yeah.
And all of us have been online with one or another of the call centers where one could understand we were frustrated,
Yeah,
it's pretty
sure.
simple. I mean, I have to go outside when I'm calling, So I think we all do. It's so much fun. It's just lifting,
Yeah.
And so, but word-based analysis can only take you so far. It's just like its application in the legal space. Plus, if I ask a person, tell me how this call went. If you're a Midwesterner, if you're from Utah, you don't want to tell them it was a bad call. If you're from New Jersey, even if it was a good call, you might say it was a bad call. And I'm not trying to insult New Jersey.
Yeah.
I grew up in Connecticut.
Yeah.
Pretty, rough on the edges. And I appreciate that. But in our case, we're not doing that. We're not looking. Those are subjective approaches to sentiment analysis. What we do in the call center space is provide the same tools built in the same kind of setting, clinical setting that allows us to have a foundation of accuracy and truth. And so we can tell them that this person entered the call, because let's say the call went for 5 minutes. We could be measuring them 4 or 5 times,
Mm-hmm.
So we could tell them they entered the call, their anxiety levels were here. And when they left the call, their anxiety levels were much lower. We could tell them that. We don't have to say they entered the call and they were sharp in their tones and the words they were using. And they said thank you at the end and assumed that meant, okay, I got what I needed.
Yeah.
Because it may or may not. I mean, I've said thank you in ways that aren't really thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I've gotten those thank yous. So we apply this to the call center space as well. We're working with a couple of companies where next generation avatars, so avatars that are interacting where you're calling and you're actually talking to or irritating type of thing that doesn't have any response. We're giving every few second feedback about where an individual's level of emotions are. So that avatar's algorithms are following that.
Yeah.
So they're capable now of making adjustments along the way and being more effective and being more engaged and involved with the person they're talking to. And that can be a very powerful addition to an avatar. Canary Speech focuses on those kind of things. I mean, you mentioned analysis. So we don't function with our models outside of spaces that we contract with.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't, someone can't just grab our tool and use it. Could they develop their own in Russia? Oh, yeah. They're pretty bright people over there.
Yeah.
They could develop stuff that we're developing. Let's assume we developed it. We're the good Jedis. We developed it for the good. But those are the kind of things we have been approached by the DOD. We have been approached by Homeland Security to help augment interviews with people.
For sure.
Those are possible.
I would think like law enforcement, those types of interviews, it would be super useful.
Or think about, I believe, personally, that one of the most important occupations in this country is long haul truckers.
Yeah.
They're the capillary system of our country.
Yeah.
I mean, of all the things that could end, when we think about, some catastrophe could happen, we think about all the things they normally bring to us, and we're going to make storage of that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think about all the things we really don't need. If the banking system went down for a couple of days, its impact on me would be, do I have enough cash to go buy the water I need?
Yeah.
Not do I have the cash, because I'm not eating cash. I may be eating beans, but I'm not going to be eating cash.
Yeah.
So you think about them and you think about the stress and the impact on their health. They could have a system of monitoring it, even self-monitoring it, where we could help them reduce their fatigue and reduce understanding when to stop. Because not every human being is the same, and they have a certain number of miles or hours they can be behind the wheel. Well, maybe for this particular person, that's not the right length of time.
Yeah.
So we could provide that kind of thing, and there are conversations ongoing about that. And other areas like that, fatigue in the workplace, particularly if you're moving gigantic equipment that requires, quite frankly, skill sets well beyond mine.
Yeah.
So monitoring that at the beginning of every day and saying, hey, or an athlete or a cancer patient, have you recovered from the last episode? Whether that was the training you were doing and you're ready to do the next level of challenge, or the cancer treatment you endured, have you recovered to a baseline that we're not just breaking you down, rather than, in fact, helping you cure? So we're working in all of those types of areas as well. But our main focus is in this area of developing in one space and coming across. The consumer health space, we offer a tremendous, capability now to augment the information they have on a regular basis as biofeedback. So it's not just how am I feeling today, but rather what are my scores, and tracking it longitudinally, and seeing if I'm also looking at my exercise and looking at how many hours of rest I had and what my resting heart rate is, and I see trends in the wrong direction. And the most predominant impact or apparent impact on that is that I'm no longer, for the last 5 days, I haven't gotten out for a walk. Well, maybe I need to make sure that becomes a part of my regular life, and my anxiety, depression levels come back to normal.
For some reason, my mind keeps going to political use cases, and
we are in that season.
It's probably because we're in that season,
Mm-hmm.
and I think how incredible it would be to see real time, on a debate, for example, all of these different things from both of these people up there. That's got to be. I mean, you could theoretically do that. You don't do that, but you could theoretically do that.
Do you remember one of the Star Trek episodes, one of the original Star Trek episodes with Kirk? Well, I guess they all had a Kirk in them.
Mm-hmm.
Where their computer system, they were sitting at the table and the computer system said they're lying,
Yeah.
So people think that, okay, we should be able to do something like that because anxiety levels and other levels change in an individual. And if you're reading heart rate and stuff, it's like a lie detector, if you will. Yeah, we haven't done that intentionally. Yeah. We don't do that. But could that be part of this in the future? Maybe.
Yeah.
At the present time, isn't it amazing that we could just...
Unbelievable.
Yeah. It's really cool stuff.
Are there diseases that you have not been able to crack that you're hoping to?
Again, if you go back to this example I gave of the orchestra, the orchestra are the bunch of the instruments that we have. If they get damaged, or they're not getting the proper signals from the conductor, you can imagine almost like a Saturday Night Live skit, where he's doing this, or the bean thing where he's playing Chariots of Fire, where his entire
Oh, yeah,
thing
yeah,
is this. One of my favorite comics. You can imagine that if the central nervous system is giving wrong directions, then it's going to impact in some way. Both the central nervous system and the various components of this orchestra are trying to keep language working and communication working. Parkinson's patients get this draw. They lose the power of their speech because of weakening in their muscles, and that draws over time. But my personal feeling is that if it's related to any of the components of speech, that the motor functions that create speech, or the central nervous system directly, then we have a reasonable opportunity to model it and track it. Different diseases have very, very high accuracies. Progressive neurological diseases, accuracies are 96 and higher, correlated with the clinical team.
Wow.
Depression, anxiety, and other things are in the 80s. Even mild cognitive impairment, which is hard to read, and the labels for it are hard to predict. Speech alone is 84, 85% accurate, and Alzheimer's disease is 95. So, I mean, really high. When you get into other illnesses that are further away from the functions and what creates and what drives, then you're probably going to find things that are further out. There's been a lot of work with predicting stroke and heart disease. Stroke, I think we're probably more likely to be successful with than heart disease. That's my personal feeling. And I've looked at the literature. And I think that has a lot to do, not that there aren't indicators, but the indicators are more short term. Like in a heart or a stroke patient, there's good evidence, papered evidence, research paper that suggests that, and family members, that days before the stroke happened, I could hear it in his voice. I heard changes in his vocal patterns. I don't know exactly what they were, but I could hear it. I should have paid attention. If that's the case, we could model it, but we're not ambient listening. We're not constantly, right now our mode is to engage with a person when they're engaging with the tool, not to be listening. We don't do that.
Yeah. Do you think about ways that this type of technology could be used for bad? And also follow up on that, like, what other ways could it be used for good that we're not thinking of?
Well, everything we have can be used for bad, sadly. But and Jeff and I thought about that in the beginning because we felt it could become a very powerful tool in the hands of the right people. And whenever you could say this is going to be a powerful tool in the hands of the right people, the converse is true. It could be true. So what we did was we said, okay, the healthcare has created processes and rigors and security requirements that help keep the good in the hands of people using it for that purpose. So that's why we decided that's where we would be. And then if you bring that kind of structure across, protecting individuals, any kind of information that could be considered private, we're already functioning in the highest level of security you can be in.
Yeah.
And we're very, very careful. We never have the identity of anyone in our systems. So the whole notion that, a piece of voice could identify an individual, that's probably true of a public figure because there's a lot of public information associated with that individual. But if that's the case, they're already very public.
Yeah.
In our particular case, and then getting a hold of anything we would have on them would be very, very difficult because of our systems and our securities and our penetration and all the things that we do.
Yeah.
So I think one has to always consider the potential that things that can do very good can also do harm. And if you consider that and then you position yourself in with responsible actions within the framework that has been constructed to protect, then you make the likelihood of something like this happening very, very remote.
Yeah.
And so that was our intent consciously.
What are some other areas that it could be used in the future?
So one of the, and I'm not trying to do a commercial, but
Oh, yeah.
it ties to
Please
it.
do.
One of the most recent patents that got awarded is called paired neural nets for Canary. And we have 3 families of different patents looking at the use of vocal biomarkers in the analysis of disease, the building of algorithms for the assessment from vocal biomarkers for the assessment of disease. And then this paired neural net family, that compares the features extracted from one time frame to a future time frame. So all of us are changing over time. And our hope is that the things that we are doing are improving our health. So for any of the things I'm mentioning, whether it's a progressive neurological disease or it's cognitive health, whatever it is, if I'm capable of accurately measuring how I'm progressing with that, then I may better understand, is what I'm doing helping?
Mhm.
And that's critical. So imagine, very simple example, a cardiac patient is released from the hospital. The risk that they will return to the hospital is about 20% of all patients. Of that 20% that return, more than 60% of them never leave the hospital.
Mm.
And so the goal is, and in fact, it's so sharp that hospitals that have return of patients within the first 30 days lose like 20% of the insurance reimbursement. So that's an encouragement, maybe financial encouragement, maybe to really focus on this, but it was done because we really needed to focus on it.
Mhm.
If we can help them pass that 30 days, the likelihood that they will then sustain themselves to a useful life is much higher. So what happens is a patient is discharged. They're assigned to an individual at the hospital. Let's say it's a nurse. It could be a range of different clinical professionals, but that nurse is going to call. So nurse Nancy is going to call Mary at home, and she's going to call her through the first month twice a week, every week. In the second and third month, once a week, unless she deems it necessary to call more often. And it's always on the judgment of their experience and intelligence. And so Mary goes home, and one of the huge concerns is Mary getting enough rest and sleep? Is she recovering physically? Because if she is, her immune system is returning to normal. She has the strength to do things. Is Mary suffering from anxiety or depression? Is Mary suffering from other elements, like maybe a pulmonary tract infection? Because if that happens, that's deadly for Mary. We got to get her back in.
Mhm.
So all of those things are watched after, and so a few other things. And so when Nancy is listening to Mary in that first call, she's assessing those things, and she's asking her a set of questions. And we're talking with numerous hospitals about this. And talking, here's these questions. And then by Thursday, she's talking to Mary again, but in between time, she may have talked to 25 other people. And so trying to hear these things in Mary's voice, even pulmonary sound changes, and Mary might be a smoker, so her pulmonary sounds sound different anyway. She's on a phone. Mary, are you in the same phone? Are you in the same room? Well, all of those things are difficult for Nancy to ascertain, to understand, because of the chatter she has from all the other voices. And I like to tell people that among an assessment, an accurate assessment of all of these things, our models are not good at that.
Mm.
They're perfect at it. They are. They're perfect. And that's what paired neural nets are.
That is incredible.
We take a select group of features for anxiety and for pulmonary sounds and for vocal patterns that are unique to Mary. And in real time, we're comparing all of those things. And within seconds, with everything I've talked about, we can analyze and return to that tablet within 3 seconds. And so we're doing that, and we come up with, if you will, an alert to Nancy, and say, pulmonary sounds may need to be checked. So it draws Nancy's attention to it. Those are the kind of things that in real time, you can augment that interaction between two human beings. The person with the brain, the person with the intelligence and the experience and the judgment and the call on this is Mary, or Nancy rather. She's going to make that call. She's going to say to Mary, we just got to get you back in. I'm just not feeling good. Now, I don't want you to get excited, but I want you to come back in. I'm going to arrange for an appointment tomorrow morning at 9, and brings her back in proactively. So those are the kind of things that I think we can add to medicine. We can provide reach for them out into the community, out into populations. We can more easily assess across demographics. I mean, it doesn't matter where a person is in the world. Almost everybody has a cell phone.
Yeah.
So we can reach populations that were difficult to reach before. We've been working with a population between the borders of North Ireland and South Ireland. They used to call them gypsies. They now call them border people. Gypsies was a little easier to understand for me personally. A population of about 10,000 people. We were able, through their cell phones, to connect them with a hospital in Belfast, Ireland. These people don't go to hospitals.
Yeah.
And so now they have connections with clinical people who can talk with them about a range of different things and to help guide them on their health. And it's less intrusive in their lives. So those are the kinds of reaches I think that technology, good technology, I think can push out. In this application that I talked about, today we have companies like Nuance. Technology offers the ability to listen to the conversation between the doctor and the patient, make a transcription of that, an accurate transcription of that, and then selectively using AI to look at the kind of words that have been spoken, to identify things that need to be hallmarked or highlighted, and potentially even for insurance reimbursement, and translate what a patient may say into the words that are more recognizable through the system, both for the doctor and for future people looking at it. All of that's done what is called ambient listening. So I'm just listening. Canary Speech is in a process of becoming a combined solution with that, just quietly sitting there. We don't impact on the time between the doctor and the patient. We don't change anything that's ongoing. We're just listening to that conversation. We have the ability through that listening to score a whole range of different potential health conditions for that patient. And because of burnout, we're also scoring the doctor or the nurse. And
that's interesting.
That may go back to the doctor or the nurse. And in some cases, there's a program to do that. In some cases, they don't want to do that right now. That's okay. But our technology could do multiple voices in that same space without impacting on the time. They know what's going on. It's part of the informed consent, but it's not impacting. They don't have to go to the side and fill out a form. They don't have to pick up something and talk about a picture they see. This is just from the conversation they're having with their doctor.
It's actually beautiful. It's actually crazy.
I know.
To be honest with you, like it's kind of blowing my mind on something like mental health, which is such a huge issue, particularly now. Maybe it always has been, but it seems like it's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. Like degrees of depression, degrees of anxiety. Can Canary get to like treatment through? Through just listening to 40 seconds of someone?
So we're a tool in the clinical
Sure.
team members box. We can tell them whether they're normal, moderate, or high in any of these, which is a standard measurement. They're not trying to say you're 96% or you're 89%. There's a certain range in which you're considered high and it should be referred and treated. There's a certain range in which you're normal and they say fine. And then there's that middle area where they say it's been this way for months. We ought to consider treating this versus the first time I see it or even the second time I see it, whatever the clinical team members, the doctor's decision is. They may advise them to get better sleep or get back to walking. You used to walk all the time, whatever. Hopefully they know the people, and very often they do. So we're providing objective, again, instead of subjective information, question sets that are being answered by the opinion of someone. We're giving objective information that is based on vocal biomarkers or on biomarkers of the body. And that information has in itself a higher level of efficacy. It's not dependent on the opinion of someone. Because you see that, we have anecdotally, we hear examples of this all the time. I heard one Thursday of last week where one doctor was talking to another clinical team member and evaluating them for an annual checkup. And they had done a Canary assessment, and the doctor knew that ahead of time. And their depression level was real high. Their anxiety level was moderate, medium, And he said, "How are you doing? We've talked a bit about depression." And the gentleman said, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm just fine." And he said, "Oh, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?" And he said, "Oh, I don't want to talk about it." He said, "Look, he said, I came off my medication because I don't think it's right for me right now. And I'm evaluating that right now. And I'm handling it. I'm managing it." He said, "Well, it looks like your depression's pretty high." He said, "Yeah, it's pretty high, but I didn't want to talk about it." So it allowed them to talk about it.
Right.
And it allowed them they're friends, I'm sure. They know each other. And it allowed them to get past I don't want to deal with it right now, to dealing with it's going to take the same amount of time. So why don't we just talk about it?
Yeah.
It's kind of like my wife and I take assessments almost every day. My anxiety level is like here. It just ranges, in this particular level. Hers is just a notch above it all the time. and that's like, when that first showed up, it was like, "Hey, why is mine higher?" And I said, "Because that's your engine. That's where your engine's running.
Yeah.
Mine runs here, yours runs there. My peaks are higher. Let's say that's true."
Yeah.
And so these are friends. These are people who know each other. And often these relationships between patients and doctors or clinical team members are deep, deep relationships. This allows to open up conversation. And we see it that way.
Yeah, that is fascinating. How big is Canary?
Canary is about 25 people now. Everything we do is automated. So over half our company are scientists and engineers. And this year we did a fundraise this year, and we hired two individuals that are spectacular, truthfully. One is Jill and the other one's Blaine. They're both spectacular. And one came from years of experience with Teladoc, managing the Microsoft account, and manages it for us. And Blaine came from 20 plus years experience in the healthcare space, understands that. So that was really, prior to that, it was just all hands on deck. We had business for the last 5-6 years, but we were building, and we're fully commercial now.
And when you say fund, you took venture capital?
Yeah, we took some venture capital. We did a Series A round. Cordis Capital was the lead in the round. The Perry family group here in Utah is an investor in the company. And there are others. I mean, David Bears, who's a very famous entrepreneur, is an investor in the company. We have wonderful people associated with us.
How are you thinking about artificial intelligence, and how does it affect all of this?
Well, we really, truly are artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the real stuff here.
Yeah, and we think about having training systems, deep neural nets in our case, and building algorithms like our avatar, if you will. It's running on an algorithm. Building algorithms that are uniquely designed for different diseases, being able to run those in series simultaneously in multiple streams. So we're processing in milliseconds, and from when we get enough audio, which is about 40 seconds, to when we're returning stuff is seconds, 3 seconds of time. So all of that is developing rapidly. We're capable we're constantly improving things and adding new languages, and we're adding new diseases all the time, 3, 4, 5 new diseases every year. So we didn't think of this as a behavioral health issue or anxiety, depression. We didn't think of this as, Alzheimer's product. We thought of this as, really, truly, we thought of this as a platform of technology that could could become a companion in the future of healthcare. That's how we saw it. And healthcare is going to play out more and more and more in the homes of our people, in the homes of who we are, because we're an aging population. We're going to live longer. We're going to have life struggles that come with that, and we're going to also have a smaller medical staff to treat us. So between burnout and just a limited number of spaces in our medical schools, our population is growing and our services are not. So augmenting the ability of those individuals to help people, helping people to also manage their own lives better, all of that was part of our picture.
What's the end game here? Because obviously you've taken venture capital now, so there needs to be some sort of exit. How do you imagine that? I mean, what is Canary in 10 years?
So our hope was to be able to create a technology or tool that allowed for, regardless of where a person lived in the world, for their clinical team to use that as like you would any other medical tool.
Right.
And in order for that to be realized, we'll end up being acquired by some larger company, someone who has a worldwide footprint. We will create the foundation of that capability and validate that through both the validation, the scientific validation of the efficacy of what we do, the accuracy and the range of different diseases, the different languages we work in, all of that is part of it. But then being able to validate that also with large organizations, medical organizations, acquiring or incorporating this as a standard of how they run their day. And that's ongoing right now. That part of this is ongoing. That will generate revenue, of course. But we see ourselves become part of a larger healthcare effort. One of the large organizations that either creates and provides tools or actually does both. That's what I think will happen to the company with respect to the shareholders and an exit for them.
I'm blown away. I'm blown away by everything you're working on. It's such an incredible company. I love that it's in Utah.
I know,
isn't
it amazing?
This is a Utah company. This feels like it should be a Silicon Valley company. I love that it's in Utah.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you for coming on. Seriously, I'm so impressed. I could talk to you for another 10 hours. So come back.
Well, I will anytime. We're right here in Provo with you.
Yeah,
so we're at the old Novell building right now.
Oh yeah. I used to work out of there.
Yeah,
that's a great campus.
Yeah, it's a great campus.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Well,